Good evening. I'm Dr. Grace Telesco, and welcome to the Criminal Justice Forum. We're live streaming from the NSU Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. Each of our programs examine exciting topics in the field of criminal justice, and all of our guests bring
I'm Dr. Grace Telesco,
and welcome to the Criminal Justice. As each of our educational NSU Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. Criminal Justice. Each of our programs examine exciting topics in the field of criminal justice, and all of our guests bring
I'm Dr. Grace Telesco,
and welcome to the Criminal Justice. As each of our educational NSU Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. Criminal Justice. Each of our programs examine exciting topics in the field of criminal justice. And all of our guests bring I'm Dr. Grace Telesco, and welcome to the Criminal Justice. As each of our educational NSU Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Telesco. I don't know if you heard like double of all of that, but I hope you didn't. And there's no way for me to know if you heard that on YouTube. But it was like, I don't know. It was like a double looping of that video. But in any event, tonight I have my very special guest here with me. It is my good friend, Ed Dentzel. We haven't had him in a very long time. And he'll explain why he wasn't with us last month. But I'm going to ask Ed to please come on now and join me. And we will welcome Ed Dentzel. He is the host of the very famous and popular podcast, Unfound. And he is committed and dedicated as a journalist, as a filmmaker, screenwriter extraordinaire, but he is dedicated to giving voice to those who are unfound, who are missing persons. And so we're going to dive right in. Tonight is a very, very special, a special one. We've done it before. We've actually done this case before, but we're going to look at it a little differently this time because this just recently went to trial again for the second time, and Ed was called as a witness. And I won't do a spoiler. I'll let him tell you everything that there is to tell about this, why this case is so important, why this case has even more importance than any case that we've talked about before. So welcome, Ed. I am going to try to get our closed caption up because we need some people that need that on YouTube, and I'm gonna be working on that behind the scenes. So take it away, Ed. Good to have you back.
Yeah, good to see you. Yes, the last time we got together, I was right there at Nova Southeastern University in your office. Beautiful office with a lot of memorabilia and great law enforcement books. And I appreciate you. You had work to do that day, and you even allowed me to use your office to get some of my own work done, which I have to thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed being down there. I cannot believe it was 2 months ago that we did that. I don't know where the time goes. Where does the time go, Dr. Telesco? Tell me.
I do not know where the time goes. I don't, because, clearly, I don't even remember when we saw each other last. Now, you were saying June, but we
did our last show like this in June, and then we took off. You went on a trip. We didn't do it in August. Then I went down there in September. Of course, we did a show together when I spoke to one of your classes. And then
that's why.
Yeah. And then, of course, we know what happened last month, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, why we didn't get together last month.
That's why. So that's why we're pre live stream. We were kind of doing some pre-production work, and
Yes.
I said, wow, your background looks different. And you said, no, this is how we always do it. But the truth is that we haven't done a show live stream with you on the West Coast, me on the East Coast.
I'm here on the East. Yeah, Florida. Yes. So Florida. Yes.
Well, I mean, Florida. It's all about Florida. But anyway, we haven't done it via Zoom like this since June.
Yes,
That's right.
That's right.
So that's why I
was there. That's right.
That's why I was a little taken back by the background. But anyway, so let's just dig right in. Tell us the story. Tell us about this case. Tell us why it's so important. Give us the facts, and then tell us the special piece of the trial, and your role in it, and all of that, and how it all worked out, and then even some maybe like debriefing around. Like, what has there been any fallback or backlash, etc.?
Yeah,
okay,
we'll certainly get into a little bit of that for sure.
All right.
Yes, and I know you're playing it as a spoiler, but I don't think that we're going to ruin anything by saying that there was a second trial. We're talking about the trial of Steve Pankey, who I'll just say it right now, that a jury back in late August decided that he did kill Janelle Matthews way back in 1984. And yes, we did talk about this last year. We did a live show last year about this very topic, in which it was already a hung jury the first time around. So that's why they decided to retry him. And it was like Groundhog Day all over again, deja vu all over again, where I was I would say it was request, to go out to Greeley, Colorado, which is an hour north of Denver, to testify. I didn't so much testify. I did a little talking on the stand, but so much to represent the interview that I did with Steve way back in 2019. And so they did find him guilty. But what we're going to do tonight is, now that we have a conclusion to this, that I'm going to go over the general facts going back to 1984. Now that they are all out there and we know what the jury has decided, I'm going to kind of show you the investigation, what went on in 1984, like through the early 90s, and then even what happened recently, the whole way up to Steve being convicted. And I believe that the jury came back with their guilty verdict on Halloween, so just a week and a half ago, or a couple weeks now, which was a Monday. So that's what we're going to be doing. And before I get started, I want to anybody who's going to be watching or listening to this, I want you all to understand that although I was called as a witness for the prosecution, they used my interview that I did with Steve back in 2019 as a way to convict Steve, and at least it worked the second time. I'm a true believer, even though I cover disappearances, even though I work very closely with my guests who are usually family members, and I want all these missing people to be found. I am a journalist, and I try to look at things very objectively. I think that's kind of something that's kind of out of vogue in all types of media these days, but I really try to keep a very even keel, straight down the middle on everything that I do for Unfound. And in fact, even to the point, even with my guests, who I've gotten to know very, very well, most of them, I'm always honest with them. Even if it is something that is the exact opposite of what they think, I will give them my honest opinion. I'm not a guy that's, go along to get along. I'm really not that type of guy, even in my private life. So I call it like I see it. And sometimes people don't like that. I'm not trying to say I'm special or anything, but that is how I approach everything I do in my life, especially when it comes to hosting Unfound and doing the work that I've done for Unfound. So I don't want anybody to think because I was called for the prosecution that I was rooting for them. I really wasn't rooting for anybody. I really wasn't. I'm just there. I just want to make sure that the right person gets convicted. The jury decided it was Steve Pankey. So that I just want to start with that. So the discussion points that Dr. Telesco and I will go over after I go through all of this, the discussion points for later will be, and I like the number 3, I do this every time for this live show, and I do that even with the podcast. Number 1, why does finding a body mean so much? Now, of course, in the work that I do for Unfound, it's all unsolved missing persons cases. We don't have any remains at all. But why does when a body's found, why does that suddenly become so important? Number 2, just when we start thinking forensics means so much is the second topic. And then the third topic is just really my experience being not just in court once, but twice. And I'm still the only true crime podcast host anywhere, anytime, who's ever been a witness in any criminal trial out there. So let's do an overview of what we now know is a murder. Of course, it was a disappearance for 35 years. And so that's the way I kind of get to look at this. The location was Greeley, Colorado. It was December 20th, 1984. So just a few days before Christmas. As I stated, it was at first a disappearance. Janelle Matthews had sung as part of a chorus for her school, and she was taken home. She was dropped off by a guy whose name was Russ Roberts, and Russ Roberts also had his daughter along. Janelle was friends with his daughter, and I guess he volunteered or was asked to drop Janelle off after this chorus concert. It's still unclear to me to this day whether Russ Ross knew he was dropping Janelle off. He knew that she was going to be alone at home, or just had no idea. Still not sure. I'm not sure if that was really clear in the trial, but he dropped Janelle off. And then hours later, like about an hour later in the evening, Janelle's father got home and she was gone. Did probably what any parent would do, maybe called the neighbors, maybe walked next door, probably called Russ Ross just to say, hey, did you drop Janelle off? But very shortly, very soon, very quickly, before the night was over, Mr. Matthews and his wife certainly quickly realized that something was not right, and they got the police involved. And so the investigation starts. Of course, they're hoping they're going to find Janelle alive very quickly. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe she walked off somewhere and didn't tell anybody. Maybe that's what they were hoping. Obviously, that's not what happened. But when the police showed up, here is what they found. They found footprints in the snow that went around the house. In addition to those footprints, though, and it looked to be a man's footprint, a sizable shoe or boot. The footprints, somebody tried to rake them over. You could still tell that there were footprints, but it looked like somebody had grabbed a rake from the garage. The garage door was up. Somebody had gone there, gotten this rake, and tried to, disguise them, I guess you might say. And like I said, the garage door was open. What they discovered a little bit later, not right at that time, maybe the next day or within the next few days, is that Mr. Matthews was a principal. And so he was in charge when a teacher wasn't going to be able to make it to school the next day. He was in charge of finding a substitute. While Janelle was home by herself, one of these teachers called saying she wasn't going to be able to make it. Janelle answered the phone. And so we know that Janelle was there for at least an extended period of time after Russ Ross dropped her off. But we're going to come back to that phone call later. And so Janelle talked to this woman. And what they also found out after that night is that in talking to friends of hers, other people who had run into her over the past few days, is that she had told a friend of hers that she talked about somebody following her, maybe even somebody in an orange car. But in addition, what also came out in the trial, it is fairly clear that if Janelle had not disappeared on December 20th, 1984, that she was actually planning to skip school the next day. This is what she told a friend of hers. This friend, under oath, testified to this in the trial. The police looked at the house, around the house. There were no forensics with scientific evidence to speak of. No evidence, no fingerprints, no forensics that could be tested once DNA became a thing. Of course, this is 1984. I usually think about DNA as being somewhere kind of becoming a thing around 1995, something like that. It became kind of into the public sphere. But there was nothing that was taken at the time could then be tested in 1985, 96, 97 to identify any strangers, let's just say, who were inside or outside the house. There were also no signs of violence, no doors that were busted in, no lamps that were thrown onto the ground, no cracked mirrors, windows, nothing like that. It did not look like somebody had forced his way or her way or group into the house. But it was clear that Janelle was not there, and that she could have been taken by force, even though there were no signs of a forced abduction. Also, it came out at the trial around that time, around 9, that time where Janelle was home by herself. There was a neighbor's dog that was barking between 9 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. for some reason. May have something to do with the disappearance, maybe not. Nobody's quite sure, but that also came out in the trial. Nobody saw any suspicious cars. Nobody saw any suspicious people. They went to talk to all the neighbors. You have to remember, though, that this is December. We know it gets dark very early, and so it might have been difficult for anybody to see anything anyway. In addition, it was 8:30, getting to 9 o'clock at night. Most people are going to be home, especially in the winter at that time, but nobody saw anything. The significance of Janelle's disappearance, as it was in 1984 into 85, is that President Reagan actually mentioned Janelle in a speech that he gave in early 1985. Of course, this is very unique. Although I've not really looked into this myself, I'm going to guess that a missing child or even a missing adult being mentioned by a president of the United States is very, very rare. But this is what President Reagan did, and he chose for some reason to talk about Janelle Matthews. This is how big a news it was at the time. Even though Greeley, Colorado, it's about 100,000 population now in 2022. I think it was much smaller at the time, but still, to get that attention is a big deal. Now, what was learned from the trial is that from 1985, let's just say through the rest of the 1980s, the police had narrowed it kind of down to 2 suspects. They were Norris Drake and Steve Pankey, but they were suspects for completely different reasons. And so I'm going to go through the facts about Norris Drake, and then I'm going to go through the facts about Steve Pankey. Regarding Norris Drake, he did not live across the street, but his mother did. He lived right across the street. She lived right across the street. And so he became a person of interest just because he happened to be in that area around that time that Janelle went missing, but he did not live there. I want to stress that. His alibi was that his mother said, well, around the time that Janelle went missing, they figured that out, that he was actually with his mother and his sister, and they were watching some news show on TV. Could have been Johnny Carson's show, something, but he was there. She and the sister claimed this, that yes, he was there at the time that Janelle would have gone missing, just a couple doors down. What he said, though, when he was interviewed back in the 1980s is, yes, he was at home, and then he left sometime later. He said he had to do some errands. He's had to run some errands, and that his family said that he did not get back until after midnight. In addition, what came out at the trial from the defense, which the prosecution did not argue with this, is that when he was interviewed by police at the time, he had referred to Janelle as being dead very quickly, start using kind of verbs in the past tense. Janelle was this, Janelle did that. And what to make of that? I even do that with, of course, my own podcast. So is it unusual? Isn't it unusual? I think that's just what people do. But he did that, what they said was fairly quickly. And so that kept him on their radar. Something that came out that he told the police that, yes, he knew the Matthews family, and he claimed that he had actually at least babysat Janelle. However, the Matthews family said that never happened. He had never babysat either of their children. They had 2 daughters. And I'm not even sure if he had ever been in their house at all. So he said something about the Matthews family, which wasn't true. He also happened to know about the footprints, which the police claimed was information that was what they call held back. This was not something that was released to the public back at the time in 1984. Well, in his interviews, Norris Drake knew about those footprints for some reason. And I'll get that. Will also come up with Steve Pankey. He had made the statement also to police. He claimed that Janelle had been taken from the sliding back door of their house, but it was unclear how Norris Drake knew they even had a sliding door in the back, since the Matthews claimed that he had never been to their house. Now, of course, most homes probably in the area do have sliding glass doors where you can get in on the back. That's very common. I have one right here in my own condo here. My house that I grew up in Gilpin Township had one. So maybe he was just inferring, but still it caught law enforcement's ear. What was also weird is, although he said that he claimed that he babysat Janelle, which was a lie, but then on the other hand, he also said that he didn't know Janelle. However, he said that for 12 years old, Janelle was well developed, meaning she had maybe matured more quickly than other girls her age, even though on the other hand, he claimed that he didn't know her. So I think all of that put together, you can understand why police really took a good look at him those 5 years between 1984-85 and the end of the 1980s. Makes all the sense in the world. Then there was Steve Pankey. Steve Pankey, he made himself known to law enforcement. He got involved in the investigation very early on because he just kept popping up. He went to the FBI. He was claiming to know things about the investigation or about the disappearance of Janelle, but he would not tell anybody. And as I have in my notes, he made comments about knowing info about Janelle's disappearance. He was obsessed from both his wife at the time and other people knew that he became quickly obsessed with Janelle's disappearance. He wanted immunity from law enforcement or prosecution for anything that he knew about her disappearance. Coincidentally, maybe not, he actually used to work with Russ Ross, who dropped Janelle off that night. They hated each other. He went to the same church as the Matthews family, but he got excommunicated from it, and he obsessed on that as well, wanting to get revenge against this church. He thought he was wrongly kicked out, and that was the church that the Matthews eventually went to, although he was not a member of the church once they started going there. He had this story about his father-in-law, which he told to me in the interview that I did with him, that the father-in-law came to him and said that, in so many words, somebody was going to try to blackmail Steve for Janelle's disappearance. He went and told the police this. He told me that as well. Like Norris Drake, he also knew about these footprints that were allegedly held back. This was information the public was not supposed to know. Steve knew that information somehow, just like Norris Drake did. And kind of like Norris, Steve, in talking to police, the FBI, other law enforcement officers back at the time, and even into the 90s and onward, Steve had made the statement that Janelle was dead not long after being taken from the house. He made a quote about some certain street. She was dead before she crossed, was it 10th Street, something like that. This was kind of the same thing that Norris Drake said. He was also talking about Janelle as being deceased. So there were some similarities between these two guys, but there were some distinct differences in that Norris was across the street. Steve lived 2 miles away. Norris, knew the Matthews family, whereas the Matthews family, they admitted they had never even heard of Steve Pankey until 2019, when Steve officially became the #1 suspect. So Steve and Norris, very similar in many ways, but very different in many ways. Two contrasting suspects. And of course, at the time, maybe it could have even been neither of those guys. So the police were in a quandary. Norris lives close, but has an alibi from his family. Steve lives 2 miles away, but he would not let Janelle's case go, despite seemingly having no connection to it. Police could never show, well, why is this guy coming to talk to us? He doesn't live in the area. There's no reason for him to have ever been on that street, anything like that, but he just kept popping up. A huge quandary. I'm sure it was very difficult for police at the time. And on top of everything else, what made it very difficult for law enforcement is that Janelle was adopted. And I'm adopted myself, but I think my experience with being adopted was different than hers. And there was a belief maybe that Janelle had run off all by herself to go back to her biological mother. So it very well could be they're looking at these 2 guys who might have killed her. And it very well could be she really did run off, wanted to go back to her biological family. So by the 1990s, this became a cold case. Not any movement. Steve Pankey kept popping up, running for office, having troubles with law enforcement in Idaho. He had moved there. In fact, some of those people were called to testify in both trials. In 2007, Norris Drake dies. I don't know if he was ever asked about Janelle's disappearance ever after the 1980s. I really don't know one way or the other. So from 1990 until 2018, Steve would occasionally pop up, run-ins with law enforcement wherever he was. Then in April 2019, the investigation reignites. I believe there was a new guy on the case, a new officer in charge. And so they decide to go talk to Steve Pankey in Idaho. He wouldn't talk to them. This is April 2019, so 3.5 years ago. But in July of 2019, Janelle's remains are found by accident. They were buried in a field 18 miles from Greeley, out in the middle of nowhere, certainly in 1984, but obviously not in 2019. And what had happened was that there was a crew, a natural gas line crew, digging a pipeline in that area, just going straight down this field. And wouldn't you know it, they come across these remains. Had they been maybe 20 feet either way of that, they would have totally missed them. They found a torso, arms, head found. Lower legs of Janelle are still missing to this day. There was a bullet hole in her forehead, so she had obviously been murdered. The jacket was pulled up over her head, and eventually they discovered there were no forensics, no DNA of anybody that could be pointed at as being the perpetrator of this murder. So no forensics. In August of 2019, Steve's stuff is searched. They served a search warrant. He talks about it in the interview. They just basically took everything he had. Computers, cars, phones, anything. They went through all of it, took all of it. He talks about that. Then in October of 2019, I interviewed him. 3-hour, 20-minute interview that eventually played for the jury twice in both trials, although it was edited just a bit to about 3 hours and 15 minutes. And so that was October 2019 when I interviewed him, actually October 14th, 2019. The episode came out on November 4th, 2019. And a year later, in October of 2020, Steve was eventually charged with Janelle's murder. And you should know that the only time I ever spoke to Steve on the phone was the time I interviewed him. I had email exchanges with him before and after the interview, in which he sent me a bunch of paperwork, all of which I turned over to the prosecution when they requested it from me in 2021. So in October 2021, the first trial happens. I'm called to go out there, and I did. My opinion, the prosecution strategy was to show up Steve lied over the past 37 years about everything, essentially. Show he had knowledge of the crime scene that was secret. Show how he collected anything connected to the investigation. Show that Steve has no alibi for that night. But their weakness was no forensics. No forensics. Nothing of Steve, fingerprints, DNA, nothing, blood, anything has ever been connected to Janelle's murder at all. The DA's own investigator in the late 1980s stated under oath at the trial that he never could rule out Norris Drake. That was also a weakness of the prosecution. And the inability for the prosecution to put Steve on that street at that time in 1984. Those were the weaknesses. But I talked about the strengths because Steve just would not let it go. he just continued to say new things and he just was acting very weirdly, of course, caught their attention. And that was eventually what got Steve charged. The defense strategy in both trials was to portray Klein as having a mental issue, show that there's no scientific evidence or witnesses putting Steve on the street at that time, show that the Matthewses didn't even know who Steve was, show that Norris Drake is a much better suspect, show Steve's ex-wife is just being bitter. Their weaknesses, though, were that the client admits he lied many times to everyone about many things, and many things that he told me in the interview I did with him. Eventually, in the first trial, when he took the stand, he did not take the trial in the second. Did not take the stand in the second trial, but in the first trial, he admitted under oath a lot of those things that he said to me in that interview were lies. The other weakness is Steve Pankey is just a weird guy, and third, the weakness for the defense was that he hated people connected to the Matthews. That was also between the church and Russ Ross. The first jury was a hung jury. First trial was a hung jury. To this day, at least to my knowledge, the public does not know what that split was. Frankly, I was not surprised. So the second trial, they did it all over again. Steve had two different attorneys this time. But as far as I can tell, the trial pretty much went the same way. At least it did for me. Lasted, I think, about the same length, within at least a couple days or so. And same strategy for both the prosecution and the defense. But on October 31st, Halloween 2022, Steve was convicted, 20 years in prison. So he will be 91 after those 20 years are up. The jury decided very, very quickly. It was not days and days of deciding. I think the trial finished on maybe even that preceding Thursday or Friday. On Monday morning, they came back with their guilty verdict, all 12 of them. I was very surprised. I anticipated another hung jury. So getting back to those discussion points, and maybe Dr. Telesco, you want to get maybe in on here, being that I've talked so much, you maybe can get in for some of these discussion points that of course, I've already sent to you in preparation for our show tonight. And number one is, does this not show the importance of a body, in that the body really yielded nothing? It didn't yield any fingerprints, didn't yield any DNA. All it really did, of course, it showed that Janelle had been murdered. There was a bullet in her head. Had she been strangled or something, we might not have even had that, but her remains would still be there, and we'd still know that something of foul play nature happened. But it just shows that I think everybody thought that she was dead anyway, but still they did not prosecute Steve Pankey until they could actually find the body, even though the body in the end really did not point to Steve Pankey at all. Any insight into that, of course, with all your experience? It's something interesting.
It really is. What I find the most fascinating is that someone could be convicted and sentenced on circumstantial evidence with no corroborating evidence whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I think that from everything I know about this case, because this is the second time we're actually covering it, it sounds like Pankey kind of like brought this whole thing on himself by putting his nose in numerous times over and over again. And it's kind of like, why? But that in and of itself isn't a crime, right? So it just, I find it really interesting and fascinating that they were able to find him guilty. I mean, it's mind blowing. And it really reminds me of, actually we have a student on later that is going to come on, Layla Horton, and she's one of our criminal justice majors, and she's currently working on a mock trial. My class is doing a mock trial, and it's a murder. It's a murder mock trial, but it's all made up. Okay. I created it. I developed it, and it is completely and totally circumstantial evidence. There's no corroboration whatsoever, and there's no forensics whatsoever. The only thing is that the murderer, the defendant who's on trial, was at the scene of the crime. when the crime occurred. So this is very similar to Pankey. And
that's it has more. That's more than the prosecution had for Steve, because, like I said, they never could prove that he was even on that street that night.
But didn't he admit to going to the scene?
No, Steve Pankey never admitted anything. No.
Okay.
Never admitted. Nope. No. Now, we should say, for the record, for everybody out there, we are only talking about what was actually presented at the trial. We have to be open to the idea there could be some things that the prosecution knew that they couldn't present because it did not pass muster, let's say, of, they might have gotten information other ways. Not saying they did anything illegal, but they happened upon something that they couldn't present in court because the information was gathered unscrupulously or something like that.
Right.
And so this could have certainly helped, bolstered their idea that, we can prove that he did it, but there's this evidence. That's just a guess. I have no idea.
Right.
But there are people out there saying, oh, they knew what they were doing. And it very well may they did. But we can only talk about the information that was presented at trial. That's what we're doing here.
Right.
We don't know. Even though I was a witness, I have no idea what went on behind the scenes. It
also made me think of a guest I had on the show a couple of weeks ago, a forensic anthropologist that examines bones. And so something that might be, really interesting when you talk about the forensics and not really finding anything. It could also just be, it's not that it wasn't there. It's just that it's no longer valuable.
What also catches my attention, and this is one of those things I was caught up. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. We have to remember that not all of Janelle Matthews was found. She was buried. So this is not a situation where a little girl runs off, dies in the woods, and isn't found for a while, and then they come upon her remains and only find half of her. Why? Because animals come along and animals do what they do. Wild animals do what they do. She was buried out in the middle of a field. That's how she was found. But not all of her was there. So are we to think, was her body actually somewhere else at one time, and Steve moved part of her to that location and left part of her behind? I think we have to be open to that idea, because her lower legs, where did they go? They of course dug all around that area. Surely if, there had been sediment shifting or water moving things, they surely would have found that. They didn't find her lower legs, which to me means like the knees down. So her shins and feet gone. So it does leave me open to the idea that if we are to believe Steve killed her, that he actually had her body somewhere else and then maybe went back and took part of it to that location that coincidentally, and I guess unlucky for him, they happened upon 18 years later. It very well may be, had he left the remains wherever they were, because the legs are still missing, had he left all of her wherever she was, he might be still walking around a free man.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because, you do this work every single week. You have your podcast, mm-hmm. and every single month you come on the show and we share, a fascinating case. You're not a theorist. You don't believe in that. You give a lot of voice to the families, especially. And, you look at the facts, only the facts as you know them, right? So now you're called as a witness. And just so for all of our viewers who understand, and any of our criminal justice folks that are on, there's a difference between an expert witness and an eyewitness, and then a witness, a general witness. And so where did you see yourself falling, and how did the prosecution use you?
Well, my experience getting to one of the talking points is that, I was there because obviously the prosecution thought that what Steve said in that interview was very important to them. Okay. I was there because I needed to represent the interview. I don't think that they could have just played the interview in court and me stay here in Clearwater Beach, Florida, because surely the defense, if they had problems with something that were said, they would want to talk to whoever did this interview and say, well, how did you do this? How did you do that? That's why I was there. I was there to represent the interview. I was there to assure everybody under oath that there was no editing in that interview that would, making Steve look guilty or innocent or anything else. And in fact, the interview, the way it plays, is totally unedited. We didn't take any breaks. We didn't have any issues. The way you hear it, at least in the podcast, is completely unedited, although they did take some parts out for the trial because the defense didn't like a couple things that I said. And so the judge took some of those things out. And I'm just not going to get into that.
So, yeah. So really,
that they talked about my background, what I do, so they could establish this is a guy that does this. He knows how to do this, that this wasn't, anything underhanded in getting Steve. He knew he was being interviewed. He had a chance to look over the interview outline, and then we did the interview. That's why I was there.
right. So, just to be clear for those law students in our listening audience, this would be an example of authenticating evidence, right? So, it's the real interview that's being placed into evidence via this witness. So that's how the interview gets authenticated. That's how that evidence of the interview can even be brought into the trial, brought into the court for the jury to understand. And it's Ed that's authenticating the interview. Is that how it was explained to you?
It wasn't explained to me, but that's how I've always looked at it. The DA, Michael Rourke, or any of his team never, came out and said that necessarily. But I think I can deduce that. I think everybody has to understand you just can't bring something into court and just play it.
Exactly.
You can't do that.
I'm sharing my screen right now. I just came up with this. This was in People magazine. Right. And former Idaho governor candidate convicted of cold case murder of girl who was 12 who vanished in 1984. And here's Janelle.
Yes, sir.
And there's Steve Pankey.
Yes, I think that was when he was charged. I think that's when they booked him, I think.
Yeah. So I wanted folks to just have a look at.
What I was saying is you just can't just bring stuff into court and say, hey, we're going to talk about this. The defense.
That's right.
Of course, the defense can't do that either. If they're going to just start bringing stuff in, the prosecution is certainly wondering where did that come from? Who talked to the person? And so that's what I was there to do. And that's why in the end, although technically my on the stand time was like 4 hours, I only spoke for about a half hour of that. Not even that. I mean, it's not even that. I was probably, my total time talking was 15 minutes, probably the whole thing.
So some people might be wondering, were you compensated by the prosecution for this?
They paid for my flight. They paid for where I stayed. They also, I sent them a receipt for the parking fee that I had for my car over at the Tampa airport. I paid for all of my own meals, including when my nephew and his sons came up to see me and we went to Chipotle. I paid for that too. Yeah.
So were you subpoenaed?
No, I didn't get any official paperwork or anything. They asked and I said I would do it.
Okay, great.
There was no official paperwork or anything.
Yeah.
Neither time. If they think it's important, I'll go out there. I'll say yes. I'll swear to the truth, and I'll just answer the questions as they are presented to me. But as I continue to state, I had no rooting interest in any of this.
Right.
I don't. My impression was it was going to be a hung jury again. That's why I'm in the information business and not the legal business.
Right.
But, I continue to have. As an unbiased observer, but although I don't know a lot about the legal business, I certainly do know a lot about disappearances and ones in which, although the people are still missing, prosecutors, if they were to go to trial with some of these disappearances without bodies, would certainly have better evidence against those suspects than the prosecution in Weld County had against Steve Pankey. But the big difference, and once again, going back to that first point about this is how much a body makes a difference, even if the body has no forensics pointing to any particular suspect. Whereas, how many disappearances have I covered where it's just so clear cut, but the wife is missing. The husband says, oh yeah, she jumped in a white pickup truck and took off with somebody. I have no idea who the person was, but her car's still there, her phone's still there, her clothes are still there, her purse is still there, her keys are still there. And this is what he's saying. And surely there's more information that could get those guys convicted than ever could get Steve Pankey convicted. But the difference is they lucked upon Janelle Matthews's body, and it showed that she had been shot. And all of these cases that I've covered, these women are still missing.
Yeah. Now we have an awful lot of, it's 10 to the hour, and we have a lot of our PhD and criminal justice students that are watching, and a few of them are, just love this. They love it. They love this stuff. They're into missing persons cases and into you and all of that. So I'm going to read two questions from the chat, and then I have live our undergraduate CJ majors with us.
Okay.
So Sarah asks, do the majority of your cases lack forensic evidence?
Yes.
Or do you have any cases that do have evidence, but it is not enough for the state to prosecute? It's a good question, Sarah.
Tomorrow will be disappearance 273 that I've covered. I would say we've talked about forensics such as DNA or blood being left at a scene in less than 15 of them. And what was the second part of the question?
The second part was
I'm sorry.
If you do have any cases that have that kind of forensic evidence, but it wasn't enough. It didn't rise to that level.
I'll just give you an example. Coincidentally, right from here where I live in Clearwater Beach, Florida, Patsy Action went missing, I think, in 1979. She went missing from a hotel. She was at a hotel bar with friends. She walked off, never to be seen again. Her car was eventually found later, blood all over the inside of it. She is still missing. Nobody has ever been charged with her murder, and she is surely dead given the amount of blood that was inside that car. And that was 43 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. Another question that's coming from Nicole, non-clerk, is how did you get into this business?
Well, I don't know how much of a business it is. It's a pursuit of mine. Always been interested in them. I'm interested in mysteries. Always been. It goes well with my mind. I'm not a very good manager of people, but I'm a pretty good manager of information. My mind can sort out information fairly quickly, see where the holes are in people's stories, or see where the holes are in contradiction of evidence that is presented to me. My mind is just good at that. So it's just a lot of things that just kind of came together.
Yeah. And it's just perfect for a journalist as well. And, your presence and your voice, it's just like, it's so perfect to be the host of a podcast.
I've gotten a couple complaints about my voice recently, which is absolutely hilarious.
Interesting. Okay. So there's a couple of questions here. Coda Hansen, he's one of our CJ PhD students. He's my student. And he says, if the second guy, the neighbor, was still alive, do you think the second verdict would have changed?
Wow. Yeah, I do. I will tell you this. I'm speaking from experience. And once again, I'm going to say I do not believe anybody in any level of this investigation did anything wrong. I think they just are all doing their best. Okay. But given as many disappearances that I've covered, given the choice between a guy who was across the street, who was getting an alibi from his mother, and comparing that with a guy who lived 2 miles away, who the family didn't even know, and there was no reason that anybody could say that he would ever have been on the street that night. If you were to just present me a generic disappearance with those two different possibilities, I'm going with the guy across the street every time.
Okay. So another quick question I'm going to take from the chat, and then I'm going to go live to some of our undergrad students that are here. So it's really cool. We have our PhD students in criminal justice at Nova that are all on the chat right now, and they're flooding the live chat. And then I have my guys behind the scene that are going to join us right now that are my undergrads. So here's the question from Margot Hallman, one of my PhD students. She says, what rendered the hung jury in the first trial that changed for the second, would you say? And also, prosecution usually has to turn over the trial exhibit evidence before trial. She says, what, if any, cross-examination did the defense have for you? So question one is really like, why hung jury first time? And was there any cross-examination for you?
You have to remember, I was only in the courtroom for what I did for the interview, and my answer. We can obviously eventually get the transcript. It'll cost a little money. I might think about getting all of it now that a jury, we have a verdict. But I'm not sure what the difference was. I can't say because I didn't sit in there. It would lead me to believe that maybe the first trial there were 11 people who wanted to convict Steve, and one didn't, and that's why the prosecution was so quick to try to retry him, because they thought, we only missed it by one, we're really onto something here. We're going to get right back on this, and it's just maybe just the law of percentages or something.
Right.
But as far as the rest of it, you have to. I'm sorry, you'll have to. The second part of the question.
Cross-examination. Did the defense cross-examine you?
Yeah, the defense did. He asked me 2 questions, and they had to do with the information that I gave to the prosecution. It had something to do with that. This time, Steve had 2 lawyers. I think they were both public defenders, a male and a female. The guy asked me a bunch of questions, but really it was just about my podcast. How many people did I think listen to the podcast when it came out? Where was it available? In fact, if you get the transcript, a couple of questions didn't even make any sense to me, because he claimed that I had confronted Steve something about Steve's personality type. And when the attorney asked me this question, my answer was, did I? And I think I even said something to the effect of, that's not how I remember it, or something like that. So he didn't really challenge me. There was nothing, confrontational there. I didn't really get an idea of where the questions were going, but I certainly got more questions the second time around than the first time around. But the prosecution were about the same.
Yeah. Okay. So I got one more question I'm going to take from the live chat, and then I'm going to go to the Alex Suarez, our undergrad student. And then I also have Shannon Hetzel is with him. And then we have a third student, Layla Horton, who's going to come on. So Matt has a great question. Did Pankey testify? As much as he wanted to be involved in the case, did he testify?
Testified in the first trial, and it was a hung jury. That's where it all came out, that he had lied to me about his father-in-law. Of course, that's what he's saying under oath. Who knows if now, all these years later, who knows if that story is true or not? But under oath, in the first trial, he admitted that he told lots of lies to a lot of people, not just myself, over the past 30-some years. And it became a hung jury. But what's weird, of course, he didn't testify the second time, but they could use his testimony from the first trial.
Right.
And he got convicted.
Yeah, interesting.
It would be the opposite. He doesn't testify in a hung jury. It was like the opposite.
Yeah, that's it. It's interesting because, again, it's reminding me of our mock trial that I'm doing in my undergrad class. And all these years I've been doing this. This will be, I think, the 4th year that we're doing it. And it's always been a verdict of not guilty, because it's circumstantial evidence. So, yes, the defendant has the opportunity. Yes, he has the motive, but it's just, there's not enough there, right? In all of the other times that we tried the case, the defendant took the stand and always was found not guilty. This time, they are opting not to put him on the stand.
Huh.
And I think it's going to be really interesting to see if that makes a difference, in terms of not taking the stand this time. Will he be found guilty?
Yeah, I just want to make something clear that what I just read to you about Norris Drake earlier in my presentation here, the jury knew all of that. All right, so I don't want you to think I'm speaking out of school. The defense, these things came out, and as I even stated, under oath, the DA's investigator in the late 80s, under oath, with a question from the defense attorney in the second trial, he stated, I never did clear Norris Drake. That was the DA's own investigator back then said that.
Right.
Despite that, they still found Steve guilty.
Interesting. So I'm going to go to these questions, these live questions, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about, let's say, unsolicited feedback.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay. How's that?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to ask Alex to come on. Alex, if you will. Great. All right, Alex, go ahead. What's your question?
Hey,
and this is Alex Suarez, by the way. You know him. You met him at lunch. He's our legal guy, along with Shannon, who's our legal gal. But anyway, Alex, go ahead and ask your question.
All right. So my question for you was, how often has non-admissible evidence come into play when trying to get a conviction?
Well, you have to remember, I've covered 273 disappearances. About 10% of them were solved, and only a few of them have gone to trial. But usually what ends up happening is that these suspects end up pleading out. Dennis Bowman, in the murder of his daughter, Andrea Bowman, pled guilty to that. Carlos Rodriguez, who murdered Zoe Campos, eventually took a plea on that as well. So I don't really cover a lot of trials. We have one that's going to be coming up, the murder of Tyler North, who was a missing man for a while. Who knows what will happen there? So we just don't talk a lot about trials. So really, inadmissible evidence, really not my strong suit. Just don't talk a lot about trials generally.
Right. Not until now. All right.
To be clear, I don't think any of that happened in either trial. I'm guessing maybe the prosecution wanted to get some things in and they couldn't. But like I said, I'm going to keep saying this. There's nothing that I know about anywhere that anybody did anything unethical, immoral, or illegal in either.
That's right. And the most important thing, I think, again, for viewers to understand is that you were there to authenticate the interview,
Yes.
not have any other speculation, right?
No,
You're not.
Greeley, Colorado in 1984. I was a 9th grader or 8th grader in Leechburg, Pennsylvania. That's
all right. I wouldn't brag about like that, because in 1984, I already had a year on the job. I had already been sworn in as a police officer in the NYPD. All right. So anyway, Shannon, you want to come on?
Hi. All right. So I'm more of like a fun question. So if you were called to be a juror on this case, what do you think you would have decided to be the verdict, guilty or not guilty?
I would have hung that jury from now to the end of time.
And also, I had another one, just since that was kind of a quick one. Was there any new evidence or like facts that you learned about that you didn't know prior to while watching the trials?
Yeah, I did. Maybe, like I said, the lower legs not being found when her remains were found. I think that was something new to me. And a lot of the information about Norris Drake, when I interviewed Steve in 2019, I didn't know about any. I don't think I knew about any of that, because I have to believe had I known that, I would surely ask him. So I learned quite a bit, but most of it probably was after the first trial, not so much the second trial. But yeah, I learned a lot just like everybody else. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. All right. And lastly, Layla Horton. And Layla is a freshman. There's Layla. She's a freshman. This is Ed, you never got to meet her. Well, she met you, or she knows you because you came and spoke to her class live. And this is the first time that Layla is going to be with us for the show. And so we welcome her. to the ranks of this great, awesome team that we have going on here. And Layla, what's your question?
So first, I had a question that was already answered about the other suspect, because I thought that was really interesting as far as there being two and then him having to pass away. But just to follow up, as far as how do you feel about your interview being used in this trial? Like, were you happy that it was used? Were you like, how did you feel?
I will say, that is, when I did the interview, maybe you don't know this since you're a freshman. You know, I've known Dr. Telesco for a couple of years now, but I had to be kind of coaxed into doing that interview in 2019 because that's not really what I do. I don't go after suspects and want to interview serial killers behind bars and everything. That is not what I do. But my assistants who helped me with the podcast convinced me to do it. I could have never guessed that it was going to be used in a trial, that it would even get to that point. I don't think that was foreseeable in 2019. I don't know. But it was a fine experience, but really it's not something that, was on my to-do list as far as my life. My job, I want to solve disappearances, and I suppose if some of them are murders, that's where they ended up. But I never covered Janelle Matthews' case as a disappearance. I suppose if she had not been found, maybe I would have talked to her family and we would have talked about it. But you have to remember something. What's interesting about all this is like the irony of all of this. Had I covered her disappearance in 2018, let's say, before, Steve Pankey's name would have never come up because the Matthews never heard of him. But here we are 4 years later, he's convicted of Janelle's murder. I still can't wrap my head around that.
Thanks, Layla. Good job. Thank you. So now let's get to the extra piece. And I'm not going to get into any detail. All right. At all. I'm going to let you run with it. But there has been a little bit of backlash that you've received. Yes. What, if anything, can you speak to about that?
I think there's something that I always, I am not an advocate. Okay, I'm not. I when I start thinking about advocacy for missing people, I start thinking about people who are trying to raise money and GoFundMe pages and things like that. And unfortunately, advocacy at some point becomes a little obsessive. And I think that you lose sight of what we're all really trying to do here. My job is a journalist. I'm here to help these people. But like I stated early on, I'm here to tell the truth. Okay, I'm here to cover these things, these stories, these disappearances, murders, as unbiasedly as I can, especially for all of the people who are still out there where the disappearances are still unsolved. Kissing somebody's butt is not going to get any of us anywhere. And right. So when it comes to Janelle Matthews, I think that there is a perception out there, because I interview so many families, that I should be on the side of the prosecution and the Janelle Matthews family because of all of the other work that I do. If you see it that way, then you're looking at what I do wrong. You just are. Okay, I'm here to help, but I'm most importantly here, I'm here to put the right person behind bars. And if I think that that's not been proven, I'm not here to say that Steve Pank. Now, if it was my life and I had to say, did Steve do it or not? I would have to say, no, I don't think he did it. But I'm open to any information that he did. He still could have done it. I could be wrong, but nobody should think that just because I do what I do, that I'm automatically supposed to be on the prosecution side. All right. I'm supposed to be just present the facts that they are, get as much information, and just allow it to go wherever it goes.
So were you ever asked point blank what you thought about whether or not Pankey did it? Yes or no? Were you given that question?
Under oath?
Yes.
Or no, they never asked me that. Either side never asked me that. The prosecution, even in the talks that I had with them or emails that I had with them before both trials, never asked me that. Never came.
And I think that they know better than to ask you that, because that would have been a major objection in terms of what it is that you do. What it is that you do is not necessarily an expert in investigations or the law or any of that. You're just, as the facts are presented to you, or as you uncover those facts, that's what you tell. That's the story that you tell, which is the truth as you know it.
Right. I can't see why anybody would listen to any episodes of Unfound and automatically think that I am, for the prosecution or for the defense or anything else. Now, in relation to the message you got, we're not going to mention who sent it or anything. But the funny thing is, I support that. I would find it very interesting if you had some students who wanted to look at this case and they come to their own unbiased conclusion regarding all of this. I think, that part of that message, I agree with that. I think that though the rest of course I don't, but what you received, I'm all for that. And I'm perfectly willing to let whatever people think, they come to their own conclusions. Right. Now, as far as the other backlash, that is not something that I could have ever predicted. I think that I'm still not sure what to think of it. And we're just going to have to keep it at least a little bit nebulous at this time. But
yeah, very.
I had Troll the Live show a couple weeks ago. I tried to resolve it, and it's still not resolved.
Yeah. But look, the fact is that you're a public figure. And this is being live streamed publicly. So therefore I am too. And so, people find you, and then they try to reach you, and everybody has their own reason. And look, I'm a big family. You said you're not an advocate. By the very nature, sometimes of the work we do, we're advocates, right? And we're being placed in that advocate position, which, for example, 9/11 and my work with the families. I would never have seen myself as an advocate for the families, but then but by its very nature, I became that, right? And so I think that when we are giving voice, which is what you do, you're giving voice to those who have no voice on behalf of families, because they want this to be known. They want this to be publicized. They want people to continue to look when someone's not been found, kind of thing, right? So I guess by very nature, you're an advocate.
Now, the thing is, though, to draw a very good analogy to what she's just brought up, the problem I have in the work that I do is that you hear a lot of crazy stories coming from families. And I maybe put it in your context. If you're an advocate for these families in 9/11, what would happen if some of them came to you and started saying, I believe that 9/11 was an inside job. I think actually the Israeli Mossad did it, and think at some point you're going to have to say to them, what are you talking about?
Well, I've had that, and I've had that, right? Of course, I've had that. We've had the stories that I could tell you regarding 9/11 and people who pretended to be family that had no one missing. Tragic, right? But that's, thank God, the outlier, few and far between. But what I also would say as a social worker, like, I hate to say that out loud to you, but my PhD is in social work. So, advocacy and that kind of like the person in the environment, and psychologically understanding where some people are coming from, where they get to an extreme place in conspiracies and different theories that they might have. That's also a way in which they're dealing, I think. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. I know. I would say that as much as I love at least most of my guests, some of the stories that they come to me with, I think they actually believe them. Now, once again, I try to do my job in trying to tell them probably why they're wrong, but you don't know how many people who are advocates within the missing persons community will gladly just go along with anything they say. You know, this because, well, these people need help. And I don't care if they think that they think aliens came down and abducted their child. You know, I'm going to push that theory too. That's not what I do.
Right. That's not what you do. Right.
I caught that up. You know, I learned that a hard way back in 2018 with the Tom Brown disappearance, which I think we talked about here at some point in the last few years, where at some point I just, you know, really had to think about that. And I had to take a much more unbiased approach to the whole thing. And I'm telling you, I lost a lot of fans because I wouldn't go along with one particular thinking that, you know, Tom was actually murdered, absolutely murdered. How could you ever question that?
See, but that's what makes you, but
there are a lot of people who kind of do what I do who would gladly do that.
Yeah, but that's the difference between entertainment and ethical journalism. And that's what you are. You're an ethical journalist. So I so appreciate you. And, you know, you put yourself out there, and anytime we put ourselves out there, you know, you're bound to get a little unsolicited feedback.
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
And it's okay. It's okay. You can handle it. Now, is there any last words that you want to say about this case or anything else you want to give your plug? Shameless plug?
Just one more thing maybe about the jury. What I found interesting is that we had a discussion here within the last 2 years about how juries are so caught up in the CSI effect. It seems this jury was the exact opposite. Circumstantial evidence, they didn't need any CSI stuff. The circumstantial evidence was enough. And it kind of flies in the face of way I think things have been going in the 21st century. Maybe if this is 1971 and this kind of trial, maybe we're not surprised. Here in the 21st century, it's a total surprise that people can still get convicted without forensic evidence.
Exactly. I mean, I know that if there's any of my intro to CJ, I know actually Layla is on the prosecution's team. Right, Layla? Aren't you? You're on the prosecution's team?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you are. So, like I said, for the last 4 years at this mock trial, this guy has been acquitted every time. So maybe the same vibe and energy will transfer over to Layla's jury, and all of this circumstantial evidence will yield us a guilty verdict. We'll let you know. But any other closing remarks? Ed, shameless plugs.
Yeah, shameless plugs. Tomorrow we have the disappearance of Jamie Valdez. It's a very, very new disappearance from last year out of Arkansas. That'll be coming out on Spotify, iTunes, everywhere else. His sister Sean, yes, her name is Sean, is the guest. Very excited about that. That's all ready for tomorrow. And we got the Facebook group, the Facebook page. If you would like to support Unfound monetarily for the work that myself and the assistants do in trying to get the word out about these disappearances and also help these guests behind the scenes, patreon.com/Unfound podcast. Subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to this channel. Of course, we're on right now. The Education School of Criminal Justice channel.
Yes.
And find me on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else. Friend me on Facebook, and you'll get a lot of laughs because that's all I do on my private Facebook page. Nothing but funny stuff.
That's great. Thank you, Ed, so much. Yes, to all of our viewers who have not yet subscribed to our amazing Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel, we have now 525 subscribers. And we're very excited about that. I know that does not compare to yours, but we're very excited because we've quadrupled exponentially the number of subscribers. So all of my students that are on right now, if you've not subscribed, please go up there, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you'll know when we go live. But I'm going to ask Joey to come on and shamelessly plug, by the way, Joey Jasinski is our project manager, and he's the magic behind the scenes. So, Joey, you want to tell us our last show of this particular semester or season, if you will? Tell us who's coming up.
I will. Firstly, I don't know if I'm the magic, but thank you. Next Thursday, On December 1st, we have Chief Carol Preston. She's from Highland County, Illinois, which is where Chicago is. She's going to talk about good police leadership and the difference between a boss and a leader. And that's actually our last show for 2022. But we have much more coming up for 2023. We have Ed Dentzel coming back and Adrienne Brunjarge, who is a forensic entomologist from the University of Texas, coming.
Yes, and she's a bug lady. You got to come on that show, Ed. She's an entomologist, a forensic entomologist. We're calling it Murder, Maggots, and More.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got to come on that show. You got to see that. You got to see that.
Florida, I don't know. I get enough bugs. I just had a huge moth back off my sliding glass door a couple days ago. I don't need any more bugs in my life.
Oh my God! Speaking of bugs, Joey played. We have, a sociodrama ensemble, as you know. It's called Stage for Change, and we did a great training yesterday for the dental school for our dental students. And Joey played the role of a patient. And pediatric dentistry is very particular, and we were also trying to raise awareness and educate around special needs patients. And Joey was told that if, as the patient, as the character, the dentist told him that if he doesn't brush his teeth, that there's a bunch of bugs in his mouth. And that's actually like true. And I didn't even know that until yesterday. So it really freaked me out. And I've been brushing my teeth more and more since yesterday. But I'm just kidding.
Over the past year, it's like I'm doing method acting.
That's right.
I'm a perfect actor for that.
That's right. That's right. We have a lot of, I'm going to shamelessly plug, we have solidified our season for next year. So 2023, we have some amazing guests besides the entomologist, besides Joey. I thought maybe something happened to you. You fell off the chair. You're good. I'm going to plug us. I'll plug us for 2023. So we've got the bug lady. I'm calling her forensic entomologist. But we also have Dr. Vincent Van Hasselt is going to be coming on the show. He is a police psychologist. I'm hoping he's going to talk about police mental health. And we also have Dr. Lenore Walker, who is a domestic violence expert. And she's going to be talking about the Johnny Depp case. And it's, Will the Real Victim Please Stand Up is the name of that one. And then, of course, we're going to bring back Wayne Ivey and a couple of others. So if you're interested in what we do, please be on the lookout for our announcements and our marketing around our criminal justice forum. So, Ed, thanks again.
Pleasure being here. Good to see you.
Be safe and go play some Pac-Man. I see Pac-Man in the background there.
Pac-Man and Mortal Kombat Part 2.
Thanks again. And thank you so much to our dean, Dr. Kimberly Durham, Dr. Tammy Kushner, and Dr. Marcelo Castro, all with Fishkill College of Education School of Criminal Justice. And I'm Dr. Grace Telesco, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Ed.